And we're live. Welcome, friends, to Sinister Sundays. On Sundays, we sinister, and we shall explore the unusual, the bizarre, the weird, and the uncanny. J-Lash with the thumbs up. So thank you, J-Lash. Appreciate you, friend. Batzaro says, oh, this is going to be a good one. Batzaro, do you know about Aleister Crowley or Crowley? If you do, let us know in the chat. Miko Herptile, channel moderator Miko Herptile is here, and he says, hello, superantonio and Sadie. Hello, fellow mods. Good evening or day, everyone. And hey to J-Lash and Batzaro. And Batzaro says, howdy. Howdy, friends. So tonight we're going to talk about Aleister Crowley. He's basically the father of modern Satanism, but that's very derivative. And, we're going to have a much more nuanced conversation. He's, you can't just describe him as a Satanist. He was, he was very popular in the 60s with the hippies, what the youth of today are calling boomers. So he was an okay boomer. Robert Plant, Led Zeppelin, wrote songs about him, and so did Ozzy Osbourne at the time. The Beatles were influenced by his writings and put his picture on the Sgt. Pepper's album cover. One of my favorite album covers in the history of album covers. I have it on vinyl. What's that about? But I have a reissue. I don't have an original, but it's nice. It's like 180 grams. It's gorgeous. Gorgeous, I tell you. I should show you, but I'm not going to. What else? Yeah, he did. We're going to get into it. And we'll try to explain his weird philosophies. He also wrote a bunch of novels. You may have heard about Zorro especially, but he wrote a memoir called Diary of a Drug Fiend, which is very popular in the 60s with the OK Boomers. I don't know if they were boomers back then. They were just called like hippies or the youth of today. At any rate, I have a slideshow for you, and we cannot show it at full screen because, as always, we don't own the copyright licenses. So, Aleister Crowley. Let's get into it. Aleister Crowley, or Crowley, I'm not sure, I've heard it pronounced both ways. Born, to quote Wikipedia, born Edward Alexander Crowley, October 1875 to December 1947, was an English occultist, ceremonial magician, poet, philosopher, political theorist, novelist, mountaineer, and painter. He had a very interesting life. And ceremonial magic, as opposed to, now you see it, encompasses a wide variety of rituals of magic. The works included are characterized by ceremony and numerous requisite accessories to aid the practitioner. It can be seen as an extension of ritual magic. So it's basically European voodoo, I would say. He founded the religion of Thelema, which is a Western esoteric and occult social and spiritual philosophy, as well as a new religious movement, identifying himself as the prophet entrusted with guiding humanity into the Aeon of Horus, or the Eye of Horus, in the early 20th century. A prolific writer, he published widely over the course of his life. Born to a wealthy family in Royal Leamington Spa, Warwickshire, Crowley rejected his parents' fundamentalist Christian Plymouth Brethren faith to pursue an interest in Western esotericism. He was educated at Trinity College at the University of Cambridge, where he focused his attentions on mountaineering and poetry, resulting in several publications. Some biographers allege that here he was recruited into a British intelligence agency, further suggesting that he remained a spy throughout his life. It's possible. They recruited heavily from Cambridge and Oxford. In 1898, he joined the esoteric Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where he was trained in ceremonial magic by Samuel Little McGregor Mathers and Alan Bennett. He went mountaineering in Mexico with Oscar Eckenstein before studying Hindu and Buddhist practices in India. David V is here. Greetings, David. I hope you're doing better. I hope you're well. It was great to see you last night, and as always, it's great to see you tonight. We are knee-deep in the Wikipedia article of Aleister Crowley. And Chrissy has a heart for David. Chrissy, I have a heart for you. And Sadie says hello. Sadie's very interested. I wonder why. Perhaps it has something to do with this jar of potent canine bait that I have in front of the mouse. Can you hear a crunch? In 1904, he married Rose Edith Kelly, and they honeymooned in Cairo, where Crowley wrote wrote down the Book of the Law, a sacred text that serves as the basis for Thelema, which he said he had been dictated by a spiritual entity named Aiwass. Announcing at the start of the Aeon of Horus, the book declared that its followers should do what thou wilt and seek to align themselves with their true will through the practice of ceremonial magic. And he's probably most famous for that "do what thou wilt" catchphrase, I suppose. Anton LaVey, Church of American Satanism, took that phrase and ran with it. After the unsuccessful 1905 Kanchenjunga expedition, which was a Himalayan mountaineering expedition aimed at to climb to the summit of Kanchenjunga, which would only be ultimately achieved in 1955. Yes, Betzaro, they stayed in the pyramid. We're going to talk about that. To be continued. In 1907, Crowley returned to Britain, where he attracted attention as a prolific author of poetry, novels, and occult literature. In 1907, he and George Cecil Jones co-founded an esoteric order, the AA, through which they propagated Thelema. After spending time in Algeria in 1912, he was initiated into another esoteric order, the German-based Ordo Templi Orientis, rising to become the leader of its British branch, which he reformulated in accordance with his Thelemite beliefs. Through OTO, Thelemite groups were established in Britain, Australia, and North America. Crowley spent the First World War in the United States, where he took up painting and campaigned for the German war effort against Britain. His biographers later revealed that he had infiltrated the pro-German movement to assist British intelligence services. So he was a spy, a double agent. What's that about? Just like Ian Fleming, just so many of these like Oxford, Cambridge intellectuals flirted with communism or the or got recruited by the OSS and then afterwards became authors. Moving on. In 1920, he established the Abbey of Thelema, a religious community in Cefalù, Sicily, where he lived with various followers. His libertine lifestyle, he was bisexual, led to denunciations in the British press, and the Italian government evicted him in 1923. He divided the following 2 decades between France, Germany, and England, and continued to promote his Thelema until his death. Crowley gained widespread notoriety during his lifetime, being a drug user, bisexual, and an individualist social critic. Crowley has remained a highly influential figure over Western esotericism and the counterculture of the 1960s, and he continues to be considered a prophet in Thelema. He is the subject of various biographies and academic studies. What's that about? Crowley was born Edward Alexander Crowley at 30 Clarendon Square in Royal Leamington Spa, Warwickshire, on 12th October 1875. His father, Edward Crowley, was trained as an engineer, but his share in a lucrative family brewing business, Crowley's Alton Ales, allowed him to retire before his son was born. His mother, Emily Bertha Bishop, came from a Devonshire, Somerset family and had a strained relationship with her son. She described him as the Beast, a name that he reveled in. The couple had been married at London's Kensington Registry Office in November 1874 and were evangelical Christians. Crowley's father was born a Quaker, but converted to the Exclusive Brethren, a faction of Christian fundamentalist group known as the Plymouth Brethren. Emily likewise converted upon marriage. Crowley's father was particularly devout, spending his time as a traveling preacher for the sect and reading a chapter from the Bible to his wife and son after breakfast every day. Following the death of their baby daughter in 1880, the Crowleys moved to Red Hill, Surrey. At the age of 8, Crowley was sent to H.T. Habershon's Evangelical Christian Boarding School in Hastings, and then to Ebor Preparatory School in Cambridge, run by the Reverend Henry Darcy Champney, who Crowley considered a sadist. Bazzaro says, as a fellow lover of deep research, I admire you doing these live. I appreciate that, Bazzaro. I'm glad you're here. Appreciate you. I go on these deep dives all the time over many, many subjects, not just Sinister Sunday subjects. You know, I'll go on deep dives about, you know, an actor that I'm watching on TV. Anyways, we'll talk about that more after, in the second half. But I'm glad you're here, Bazzaro, as I am Miko and David and Chrissy. I hope you're enjoying this, Chrissy. This one's for you. It's witchy. Look at all the tarot cards I put up for you. Witchy stuff. This is Aleister Crowley's tarot deck. He designed it. In March 1887, when Crowley was 11, his father died of tongue cancer. That's from smoking, I'm sure. Pipe smoking, probably. Crowley described this as a turning point in his life and always maintained an admiration of his father, describing him as my hero and my friend. Inheriting a third of his father's wealth, he began misbehaving at school and was harshly punished by Champney. Crowley's family removed him from the school when he developed albuminuria, a pathological condition wherein the protein albumin is abnormally present in the urine. Okay, then. He then attended Malvern College and Tonbridge School, both of which he despised and left after a few terms. He became increasingly skeptical of Christianity, pointing out biblical inconsistencies to his religious teachers, and went against the Christian morality of his upbringing by smoking, can I say that word? Indulging in self-pleasure and having sex with prostitutes, from whom he contracted gonorrhea. He was just living it up. Sent to live with a Brethren tutor in Eastbourne, he undertook chemistry courses at Eastbourne College. Crowley developed interests in chess, poetry, and mountain climbing, and in 1894 climbed Beachy Head. That's a chalk headland in East Sussex. Before visiting the Alps and joining the Scottish Mountaineering Club. The following year, he returned to the Bernese Alps, climbing the Eiger, Trift, Jungfrau, Monch, and Welterhorn. Moving on to Cambridge, where he was from 1895 to 1898. Having adopted the name of Aleister over Edward in October 1895, Crowley began a 3-year course at Trinity College, Cambridge, where he entered for the moral science trips, studying philosophy. With approval from his personal tutor, he changed to English literature, which was not then part of the curriculum offered. Crowley spent much of his time at university engaged in his pastimes, becoming president of the chess club and practicing the game for 2 hours a day. He briefly considered a professional career as a chess player. Crowley also embraced his love of literature and poetry, particularly the works of Richard Francis Burton and Percy Bysshe Shelley. Many of his own poems appeared in the student publications such as the Granta, Cambridge Magazine, and Cantab. He continued his mountaineering, going on holiday to the Alps to climb every year from 1894 to 1898 with his friend Oscar Eckenstein. And in 1897, he made the first ascent of the Monch without a guide. These feats led to his recognition in the alpine mountaineering community. And Aleister Crowley, a quote on his name change from Edward to Aleister. For many years, I had loathed being called Alec, partly because of the unpleasant sound and sight of the word, partly because it was the name by which my mother called me. Edward did not seem to suit me, and the diminutives of Ted or Ned were even less appropriate. Alexander was too long, and Sandy suggested toe hair and freckles. I had read in some book or other that the most favorable name for becoming famous was one consisting of a dactyl followed by a spondy, as at the end of a hexameter, like Jeremy Taylor. Aleister Crowley fulfilled these conditions, and Aleister is the Gaelic form of Alexander. To adopt it would satisfy my romantic ideals. Crowley had his first significant mystical experience while on holiday in Stockholm in December of 1896. Okay, he was born when? He was born in 1875, so he was 21 at the time. Several biographers, including Lawrence Sutin, Richard Kaczynski, and Tobias Churton, believe this was the result of Crowley's first same-sex sexual experience, which enabled him to recognize his bisexuality. At Cambridge, Crowley maintained a vigorous sex life with women, largely female prostitutes, one of whom he caught syphilis from, but eventually he took part in same-sex activities despite their illegality. The love that dare not speak its name. That's what Oscar Wilde called it. And there he is on Sgt. Pepper's. In October 1897, Crowley met Herbert Charles Pollitt, president of the Cambridge University Footlights Dramatic Club, and the two entered into a relationship. They broke apart because Pollitt did not share Crowley's increasing interest in Western esotericism, a breakup that Crowley regretted for many years. In 1897, Crowley traveled to St. Petersburg in Russia, later saying that he was trying to learn Russian as he was considering a future diplomatic career over there. In October 1897, a brief illness triggered considerations of mortality and the futility of all human endeavor, and Crowley abandoned all thoughts of a diplomatic career in favor of pursuing an interest in the occult. In March 1898, he obtained A.E. White's The Book of Black Magic and Pax, and then Karl von Eckartshausen's The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, furthering his occult interests. That same year, Leonard Smithers, a publisher who Crowley had met through Pollitt, published 100 copies of Crowley's poem Alsaldama, A Place to Bury Strangers In, but it was not a particular success. That same year, Crowley published a string of other poems, including White Stains, a decadent collection of erotic poetry that was printed abroad lest its publication be prohibited by British authorities. Let's see if we can... It was written under the pseudonym George Archibald Bishop. And I'm seeing if I can get any quotes. I'll read it out loud if I can find one for you. I should have this up and ready for you. I don't. But let's see if we can find one. Aleister, bear with me. Oh, here we go. You crown me king and queen. There is a name for whose soft sound I would abandon all. This pomp I liefer would have you call some soft, sweet title of beloved shame. Doesn't seem very naughty to me. Gold coronets, be seemly, but bright flame, I choose for diadem. I would let fall all crowns, all kingdoms, for one rhythmical caress of thine, one kiss my soul to tame. You crown me king and queen, I crown thee lover, I bid thee hasten, nay, I plead with thee. Come in the thick, dear darkness to my bed. Heed not my sighs, but eagerly uncover, as our mouths mingle, my sweet infamy. Okay, now it's getting a little. And rob thy lover of his maidenhead. Okay, this is getting a little gay. Or what's that about? Lie closer, no pity, but a little love. Kiss me once, and all my pain is paid. Hurt me or soothe, stretch out one limb above, like a strong man would constrain a maid. Touch me, I shudder, and my lips turn black, my lips turn back. Over my shoulder, if so be that thus my mouth may find thy mouth, if aught there lack, to thy desire, till love is one with us. Okay, I take it all back. God, I shall faint with pain. I hide my face. For shame, I am disturbed. I cannot rise. I breathe hard with thy breath. Thy quick embrace crushes. Thy teeth are agony. Pain dies. In deadly passion. Ah, you come. You kill me. Christ, God, bite. Ah, bite. Love's fountains fill me. Hi, Cloudy, just in time. And that was a poem by Aleister Crowley that he published under a pseudonym. And then when you think about it, the title of the collection of erotic poetry is White Stains. What's that about? In July 1898, he left Cambridge, not having taken any degree at all, despite first class showing in his 1897 exams, and consistent with second class honors results before that. Moving on to the Golden Dawn. In August of 1898, Crowley was in Zermatt, Switzerland, where he met the chemist Julian L. Baker, and the two began discussing their common interest in alchemy. I assume that anyone he met that was a male, he was indulging in deluxe baths with. Just saying. Back in London, Baker introduced Crowley to George Cecil Jones, Baker's brother-in-law and a fellow member of the occult society known as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was founded in 1888. Crowley was initiated into the Outer Order of the Golden Dawn in November of 1898 by the group's leader, Samuel Little McGregor Mathers. And then they had a big gay orgy afterwards. I'm making that up. I don't know. But I bet you they did. The ceremony took place in the Golden Dawn's Isis Urania Temple, held at London's Mark Mason's Hall, where Crowley took the magical motto and the name Frater Perdurabo, which he interpreted as "Brother, I shall endure to the end." Crowley moved into his own luxury flat at 6769 Chancery Lane and soon invited a senior Golden Dawn member, Alan Bennett, to live with him as his personal magical tutor. Okay then. Bennett taught Crowley more about ceremonial magic and the ritual use of drugs, and together they performed the ritual of the Goetia, which is a type of European sorcery that has been often referred to as witchcraft, that has been transmitted through grimoires, until Bennett left for South Asia to study Buddhism. In November 1899, Crowley purchased Boleskine House in Foyers on the shore of Loch Ness in Scotland. I have some pictures of Boleskine House here on the slideshow. And there's one of those ceremonies. He developed a love of Scottish culture, describing himself as the Laird of Boleskine, and took to be wearing traditional Highland dress, even during visits to London. He continued writing poetry, publishing Jezebel and other tragic poems, tales of Archaeus, songs of the spirit, appeal to the American Republic. That's us. That's us. What's that about? And Jephthah in 1898. Most gained mixed reviews from literary critics, though Jephthah was considered a particular critical success. Crowley soon progressed through the lower grades of the Golden Dawn and was ready to enter the group's inner second order. He was unpopular in the group. His bisexuality and libertine lifestyle gained him a bad reputation, and he developed feuds with some of the members, including W.B. Yeats. When the Golden Dawn's London Lodge refused to initiate Crowley into the Second Order, he visited Mathers in Paris, who personally admitted him into the Adeptus Minor grade. A schism had developed between Mathers and the London members of the Golden Dawn, who were unhappy with his autocratic rule. Acting under Mathers' orders, Crowley, with the help of his mistress and fellow initiate Elaine Simpson, attempted to seize the Vault of Adepts, a temple space at 36 Blythe Road in West Kensington, from the other London Lodge members. When the case was taken to court, the judge ruled in favor of the London Lodge, as they had paid for the space's rent, leaving both Crowley and Mathers isolated from the group. Ten viewers in the chat, welcome friends. On Sundays, we Sinister. Moving on to Mexico, India, Paris, and marriage, 1900 to 1903. In 1900, Crowley traveled to Mexico via the United States, settling in Mexico City and starting a relationship with a local senorita. They said local woman, but I had senorita for a little flavor. Developing a love of the country, he continued experimenting with ceremonial magic, working with John Dee's Enochian invocations. He later said that he had been initiated into Freemasonry while there, and he wrote a play based on Richard Wagner's Tannhauser, as well as a series of poems published as oracles in 1905. Eccleston joined him later in 1900, and together they climbed several mountains, and that's not all they climbed, including Itzachuihatl, Popocatépetl, and Colima, the latter of which they had to abandon owing to a volcanic eruption. Later, leaving Mexico, Crowley headed to San Francisco before sailing for Hawaii aboard the Nippon Maru. That just means Japanese ship. Maru just means ship. So it's like the SS Japan. On the ship, he had a brief affair with a married woman named Mary Alice Rogers. Saying he fell in love with her, he wrote her a series of poems about the romance, published as Alice and Adultery. Briefly stopping in Japan and Hong Kong, Crowley reached Ceylon, where he met with Alan Bennett, who was studying Shaivism. What's Shaivism? Shaivism is one of the major Hindu traditions which worships Shiva, as the supreme being. The pair spent some time in Kandy before Bennett decided to become a Buddhist monk in the Theravada tradition, traveling to Burma to do so. Crowley decided to tour India, devoting himself to the Hindu practice of Raja Yoga, by which means he believed he had achieved the spiritual state of dhyana. What's that? It means contemplation and meditation and self-knowledge. He spent much of his time studying at the Meenakshi Temple in Madura. At this time, he wrote poetry, which was published as The Sword of Song. He contracted malaria and had to recuperate from the disease in Calcutta and Rangoon. In 1902, he was joined by Eccleston and several other mountaineers, Guy Knowles, H. Pifani, V. Wesley, and Jules Jacques Guillemard. Together, the Eccleston-Crowley expedition attempted K2, which had never been climbed before. On the journey, Crowley was afflicted with influenza, malaria, and snow blindness, and other expedition members were also struck with illness. They reached an altitude of 20,000 feet before turning back. Having arrived in Paris in November 1902, he socialized with his friend, the painter Gerald Kelly, and through him became a fixture of the Parisian arts scene. While there, Crowley wrote a series of poems on the work of an acquaintance, the sculptor Auguste Rodin. Rodin is probably most famous for The Thinker, and I'm sure you know that sculpture if you've seen it. These poems were later published as Rodin in Rheims in 1907. One of those frequenting this milieu was Somerset Maugham, who after briefly meeting Crowley, later used him as a model for the character of Oliver Haddo in his novel The Magician. He returned to Boleskine in April of 1903. In August, Crowley wed Gerald Kelly's sister, Rose Edith Kelly, in a marriage of convenience to prevent her from entering into an arranged marriage. The marriage appalled the Kelly family and damaged his friendship with Gerald. Heading on a honeymoon to Paris, Cairo, and then Ceylon, Crowley fell in love with Rose and worked to prove his affections. While on his honeymoon, he wrote her a series of love poems, published as Rose Mundi, or The World of Rose, and other love songs, as well as authoring religious satire, Why Jesus Wept. Developing Thelema, Egypt and the Book of the Law, from 1904, and I have a quote here from the opening lines of the Book of the Law. Had the manifestation of Nuit, night, the unveiling of the company of heaven. Every man and every woman is a star. Every number is infinite. There is no difference. Help me, O warrior of Thebes, in my unveiling before the children of man. In February 1904, Crowley and Rose arrived in Cairo, pretending to be a prince and princess. They rented an apartment in which Crowley set up a temple room and began invoking ancient Egyptian deities while studying Islamic mysticism and Arabic. According to Crowley's later account, Rose regularly became delirious and informed him that they are waiting for you. On the 18th of March, she explained that they were the god Horus, and on 20th of March proclaimed that the equinox of the gods has come. Papa One and Mama One are here. Everyone say hi to Papa One and Mama One. Greetings, Mama One. On Sundays, we Sinister. And we're talking about Aleister Crowley. She led him to a nearby museum where she showed him a 7th century mortuary stele known as the Stele of Ankh-F-en-Khonsu. Crowley thought it important that the exhibit's number was 666, the number of the beast in Christian belief, and in later years termed the artifact the Stele of Revealing. According to Crowley's later statements, on the 8th of April, he heard a disembodied voice identifying itself as that of Aiwas, the messenger of Horus, or Hur-Parkrat. Crowley said that he wrote down everything the voice told him over the course of the next 3 days and entitled it Liber al Ve Leges, or the Book of the Law. The book proclaimed that humanity was entering a new eon and that Crowley would serve as its prophet. Well, that's just mighty convenient. It stated that a supreme moral law was to be introduced in this eon. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And Jimmy Page and Ozzy Osbourne and Paul McCartney and John Lennon and George, they all took that and ran with it. And that people should learn to live in tune with their will. The book and the philosophy that it espoused became the cornerstone of Crowley's religion, Thelema. Crowley said at the time he was unsure what to do with the Book of the Law. Often resenting it, he said that he had ignored the instructions of what the text commanded him to perform, which included taking the Stele of Revealing from the museum, fortifying his own island, and translating the book into all of the world's languages. According to his account, he instead sent typescripts of the work to several occultists he knew, putting the manuscript away and ignoring it. Well, anyways, I thought they would cover that about Zorro, but they did honeymoon, him and his wife in Cairo, and they did spend a night in the Great Pyramid. Which I guess he could do back then. Moving on to Kanchenjunga and China. Returning to Boleskine, Crowley began to believe that Mathers was using magic against him, and the relationship between the two broke down. In July of 1905, Rose gave birth to Crowley's first child, a daughter named Lilith, with Crowley writing the pornographic Snowdrops from a Curate's Garden to entertain his recuperating wife. He founded a publishing company through which to publish his poetry, naming it the Society for the Propagation of Religious Truth, in parody of the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. Among its first publications were Crowley's collected works, edited by Ivor Beck, an old friend of Crowley's who was both a practicing surgeon and an enthusiast of literature. His poetry often received strong reviews, either positive or negative, but never sold well. In an attempt to gain more publicity, he issued a reward of £100 for the best essay of his work. The winner of this was J.F.C. Fuller, a British Army officer and military historian, whose essay, The Star in the West, heralded Crowley's poetry as some of the greatest ever written. Crowley decided to climb Kanchenjunga in the Himalayas of Nepal, widely recognized as the world's most treacherous mountain. The collaboration between Yakut Guillemot, Charles Adolphe Raymond, Alexis Pache, and Alcesti Sirigo de Rihi. The expedition was marred by much argument between Crowley and the others, who thought he was reckless. They eventually mutinied against Crowley's control, and the other climbers headed back down the mountain as nightfall approached, despite Crowley's warning that it was too dangerous. Subsequently, Pache and several porters were killed in an accident, something for which Crowley was widely blamed by the mountaineering community. Spending time in Mohar Banaj, where he took part in big game hunting and wrote the homoerotic work The Scented Garden, Crowley met up with Rose and Lilith in Calcutta before being forced to leave India after non-lethally shooting 2 men who tried to mug him. He had quite a life. Briefly visiting Bennett in Burma, Crowley and his family decided to tour southern China, hiring porters and a nanny for the purpose. Crowley smoked opium throughout the journey, which took his family from Tengyue to Yongchang, Tail, Unithao, and then Hanoi. On the way, he spent much time on spiritual and magical work, reciting the Bornless ritual and invocation to his holy guardian angel on a daily basis. While Rose and Lilith returned to Europe, Crowley headed to Shanghai to meet old friend Elaine Simpson, who was fascinated by the Book of the Law. Together, they performed rituals in an attempt to contact Aiwas. Naked rituals. You just know it. Crowley then sailed to Japan and Canada before continuing to New York City, where he unsuccessfully solicited support for a second expedition up Kanchenjunga. Upon arrival in Britain, Crowley learned that his daughter, Lilith, had died of typhoon in Rangoon, something he later blamed on Rose's increasing alcoholism. Under emotional distress, that's bad news, his health began to suffer and he underwent a series of surgical operations. He began short-lived romances with actress Vera Lola Neville and author Ada Levinson, who while Rose gave birth to Crowley's second daughter, Lola Zaza, in February of 1907. The AA and the Holy Books of Thelema, 1907 to 1909. How is everyone? I hope you are enjoying your Sinister Sunday. Thank you for being here. With his old mentor, George Cecil Jones, Crowley continued performing the Abramelin rituals at the Ashdown Park Hotel in Coulsdon, Surrey. Crowley believed that in doing so he attained samadhi, or union with the Godhead, thereby marking a turning point in his life. Making heavy use of hashish during these rituals, he wrote an essay, The Psychology of Hashish, in which he championed the drug as an aid to mysticism. He also said, this is why the hippies liked him. He took all of the drugs that they loved, but, he was doing it in 1909. He also said that he had been contacted once again by Aiwass in late October and November of 1907, adding that Aiwass dictated two further texts to him, Liber the Seventh and Liber Cordis Cincti Serpente, both of which were later classified in the corpus of the Holy Books of Thelema. Crowley wrote down, I gotta get this light out of my eyes, sorry friends. Crowley wrote down more Thelemic holy books during the last 2 months of the year, including Liber LXV1, that's 96 maybe, and Liber Arcanium, Liber Porta Luca, Sub Figura X, Liber Tau, Liber Trigramaton, and the Liber Ve Arata, which again, he said, he had received from a preternatural source. Crowley stated in June 1909, when the manuscript of the Book of the Law was rediscovered at Boleskine, that he had developed the opinion that Thelema represented objective truth. Crowley's inheritance was running out. Trying to earn money, he was hired by George Montague Burnet, the Earl of Tankerville, to help protect him from witchcraft. Recognizing Bennet's paranoia as being based in his cocaine addiction, Crowley took him on holiday to France and Morocco to recuperate. In 1907, he also began taking in paying students, whom he instructed in occult and magical practice. Victor Neuberg, whom Crowley met in February 1907, became his sexual partner and closest disciple. What's that about? In 1908, the pair toured northern Spain before heading to Tangier, Morocco. The following year, Neuberg stayed at Boleskine, where he and Crowley engaged in sadomasochism. Crowley continued to write prolifically. They were just spanking each other. It wasn't a big deal. Crowley continued to write prolifically, producing such works as poetry as Ambergris, Clouds Without Water, and Nox Om Pax, as well as his first attempt at an autobiography, The World's Tragedy. Recognizing the popularity of short horror stories, Crowley wrote some of his own, many of which were published, and he also published several articles in Vanity Fair, a magazine edited by his friend Frank Harris. He also wrote Liber 777, a book of magical and Kabbalistic correspondences that borrowed from Methers and Bennett. And another quote from the Book of the Law, "Into my loneliness comes the sound of a flute in the dim groves that haunt the uttermost hills. Even from the brave river they reach to the edge of the wilderness, and I behold Pan, and I behold Pan." In November 1907, Crowley and Jones decided to found an occult order to act as a successor to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, being aided in doing so by Fuller. The result was the AA. The group's headquarters and temple were situated at 124 Victoria Street in central London, and the rites borrowed much from the Golden Dawn, but with an added Thelemic basis. Its earliest members included solicitor Richard Noel Warren, artist Austin Osman Spare, Horace Shendon Bickers, and author George Rafalovich. In March 1909, Crowley began a production of a biannual periodical entitled The Equinox. He billed this periodical, which was to become the official organ of the AA, as the Review of Scientific Illuminism. Crowley became increasingly frustrated with Rose's alcoholism, and in November 1909, he divorced her on the grounds of his own adultery. Lola was entrusted to Rose's care. The couple remained friends, and Rose continued to live at Boleskine. Her alcoholism worsened, and as a result, she was institutionalized in September of 1911. Algeria and the Rights of Eleusis, 1909 to 1911. In November 1909, Crowley and Neuberg traveled to Algeria, touring the desert from El Ariba to Omale, Bou Sada, and then Dala Adin, with Crowley reciting the Quran on a daily basis. During the trip, he invoked 30 ethers of Enochian magic, while Neuberg recorded the results, later published in the Equinox as The Vision and the Voice. Following a mountaintop sex magic ritual. What's sex magic? Sex magic is any type of sexual activity used in magical, ritualistic, or otherwise religious and spiritual pursuits. One practice of sex magic is using sexual arousal or orgasm with visualization of a desired result. What's that about? Crowley also performed an evocation to the demon Koronzon, involving blood sacrifice, and considered the results to be a watershed in his magical career. Returning to London in January of 1910, Crowley found that Mathers was suing him for publishing the Golden Dawn secrets in the Equinox. The court found in favor of Crowley. The case was widely reported in the press, with Crowley gaining wider fame. Crowley enjoyed this and played up the sensationalist stereotype of being a Satanist and an advocate of human sacrifice, despite being neither. Chrissy says manifesting. Yeah, it's basically manifesting, I guess. The Equinox continued publishing, and various books of literature and poetry were also published under its imprint, like Crowley's Ambergris, The Winged Beetle, and The Scented Garden, as well as Neuberg's The Triumph of Pan, and Ethel Archer's The Whirlpool. In 1911, Crowley and Waddell holidayed in Montigny-sur-Long, where he wrote prolifically, producing poems, short stories, plays, and 19 works on magic and mysticism, including the 2 final holy books of Thelema. In Paris, he met Mary Dusty, who became his next Scarlet Woman, and with the 2 undertaking magical workings in Saint Moritz. Crowley believed that one of the secret chiefs, Abu Uidiz, was speaking through her. Based on Dusty's statements when in trance, Crowley wrote the 2-volume Book 4, and at the time developed the spelling magic with a K, M-A-G-I-C-K, in reference to the paranormal phenomenon, as a means of distinguishing it from the stage magic of illusionists. In early 1912, Crowley published The Book of Lies, a work of mysticism that biographer Lawrence Sutton described as his greatest success in merging his talents as poet, scholar, and magus. The German occultist Theodor Reuss later accused him of publishing some of his secrets of his own occult order, Ordo Tempi Orientis, within the book. Crowley convinced Reuss that the similarities were coincidental, and the 2 became friends. Special friends. Just saying. Royce appointed Crowley as the head of the OTO's British branch, the Mysteria Mystica Maxima, and at a ceremony in Berlin, Crowley adopted the magical name of Baphomet. You know who Baphomet is. I know Chrissy knows who that is. And was proclaimed ex-Supreme Rex and Sovereign Grand Master General of Ireland, Iona, and all of the Britons. With Royce's permission, Crowley set about advertising the MMM and rewriting many OTO rituals, which were then largely based on Freemasonry. His incorporation of Thelemite elements proved controversial in the group. Fascinated by OTO's emphasis on sex magic, Crowley devised a magical working based on the love that dares not speak its name, and incorporating it into the syllabus for those OTO members who were initiated into the 11th degree. So initiation of any members who wanted to get into the 11th degree would involve a deluxe bath with Aleister Crowley himself, I'm sure. In March 1913, Crowley acted as producer for the Ragged Ragtime Girls, a group of female violinists led by Waddell, as they performed in London's Old Tivoli Theatre. They subsequently performed in Moscow for 6 weeks, where Crowley had a sadomasochistic relationship with the Hungarian Annie Ringer. And in Moscow, Crowley continued to write plays and poetry, including Hymn to Pan and the Gnostic Mass, a thelemic ritual that became a key part of the OTO liturgy. Churlton suggested that Crowley had traveled to Moscow on the orders of British intelligence to spy on revolutionary elements in the city. In January 1914, Crowley and Neuberg settled into an apartment in Paris, where the former was involved in the controversy surrounding Jacob Epstein's new monument to Oscar Wilde. Together, Crowley and Neuberg performed the 6-week Paris working, a period of intense ritual that involved strong drug use, in which they invoked the gods Mercury and Jupiter. As part of the ritual, the couple performed acts of sex magic together, at times being joined by journalist Walter Durati. You mind if I join you fellas? I want to write about it. It's for research. Sure. Come on in. The more the merrier. Sadie moved to Sadie moved to her crate. She's had enough of this sex magic. What's that about? Inspired by the results of the working, Crowley later wrote Liber Agape, a treatise on sex magic. Following the Paris working, Neuberg began to distance himself from Crowley, resulting in an argument in which Crowley cursed him. Moving on to the United States. By 1914, Crowley was living a hand-to-mouth existence, relying largely on donations from AA members and dues payments made to the OTO. In May, he transferred ownership of Boleskine House to the MMM for financial reasons, and in July, he went mountaineering in the Swiss Alps. During this time, the First World War broke out. After recuperating from a bout of phlebitis, Crowley set sail for the United States aboard the RMS Lusitania in October of 1914. Arriving in New York City, he moved into a hotel and began earning money for the American edition of Vanity Fair and undertaking freelance work for the famed astrologer Evangeline Adams. In the city, he continued experimenting with sex magic through the use of self-pleasuring female prostitutes and male clients of a Turkish bathhouse. All of these encounters were documented in his diaries. Professing to be of Irish ancestry and a supporter of Irish independence from Great Britain, Crowley began to espouse support for Germany in their war against Britain. But again, he was probably working for the OSS. He became involved in New York's pro-German movement, and in January 1915, German spy George Sylvester Viereck employed him as a writer for his propagandist paper, The Fatherland, which was dedicated to keeping U.S. Somebody subscribe? What's going on? Thank you for subscribing, Stevie J. Appreciate you, friend. Welcome to Sinister Sundays, which was dedicated to keeping the U.S. neutral in the conflict. In later years, detractors announced Crowley as a traitor to Britain for this action. Crowley entered into a relationship with Jean Robert Foster, with whom he toured the West Coast. In Vancouver, headquarters of the North American OTO, he met with Charles Stansfield Jones and Wilfred Talbot Smith to discuss the propagation of thelema on the continent. And they took many hot tubs together, if you know what I'm talking about. In Detroit, he experimented with peyote because, of course, he did. At Park Davis, then visited Seattle, San Francisco, Santa Cruz, Los Angeles, San Diego, Tijuana, and the Grand Canyon before returning to New York. There, he befriended Ananda Kumaswamy and his wife, Alice Richardson. Crowley and Richardson performed sex magic. Of course they did. In April of 1916, following which she became pregnant and then miscarried. Later that year, he took a magical retirement to a cabin in Lake Pasquanini, owned by Evangeline Adams. There, he made heavy use of drugs and undertook a ritual, after which he proclaimed himself Master Therian. He also wrote several short stories based on James George Fraser's The Golden Bough and a work of literary criticism, The Gospel According to Bernard Shaw. In December, he moved to New Orleans, his favorite U.S. city, before spending February with evangelical Christian relatives in Titusville, Florida. Returning to New York City, he moved in with artist and AA member Leon Engers Kennedy in May after learning of his mother's death. After the collapse of the Fatherland, Crowley continued his association with Viereck, who appointed him contributing editor of the arts journal, The International. Crowley used it to promote Thelema, but it soon ceased publication. He then moved into the studio apartment of Roddy Minor, who became his partner and Scarlet Woman. Through their rituals, which Crowley called the Amalantra workings, he believed that they were contacted by a preternatural entity named Lamb. The relationship soon ended. Moving on to the Abbey of Thelema. Now destitute and back in London, Crowley came from attack from the tabloid John Bull, which labeled him traitorous scum for his work with the German war effort. Several friends were aware of his intelligence work, and urged him to sue, but he decided not to. When he was suffering from asthma, a doctor prescribed him heroin, to which he soon became addicted, because of course he did. He took every drug under the sun. Moving to the commune with, he formed a commune in Italy. Crowley had ideas of forming a community of Thelemites, which he called the Abbey of Thelema, after the Abbaye de Theleme in Francois Rabelais' satire Gargantua and Pantagruel. After consulting the I Ching, he chose Cefalù in Sicily as a location, and after arriving there, began renting out the old Villa Santa Barbara as his abbey. And I've got pictures of that in the slideshow somewhere here. It's in disrepair now, decay. Moving to the commune with Herzig, Shumway, and their children, Hans, Howard, and Poupée, Crowley described the scenario as perfectly happy, my idea of heaven. They wore robes and performed rituals to the sun god Ra at set times during the day, and occasionally performed the Gnostic Mass. The rest of the day they were left to follow their own interests. Undertaking widespread correspondences, Crowley continued to paint, wrote a commentary on the Book of the Law, and revised the third part of Book 4. He offered a libertine education for the children, allowing them to play all day and witness acts of sex magic. That's not good, but when was this? This was in 1920. It was over 100 years ago, friends. He occasionally traveled to Palermo to visit rent boys and buy supplies, including drugs. His heroin addiction came to dominate his life, and cocaine began to erode his nasal cavity. There was no cleaning rota, and wild dogs and cats wandered through the building, which soon became unsanitary. Poupée died in October 1920, and Ninette gave birth to a daughter, Astarte Lulu Panthea soon afterwards. New followers continued to arrive at the Abbey to be taught by Crowley. Among them was film star Jane Wolfe, who arrived in July 1920, where she was initiated into the AA and became Crowley's secretary. Another was Cecil Frederick Russell, who often argued with Crowley, disliking the same-sex sexual magic that he was required to perform, but he still did, and left after a year. More conducive was the Australian themite Frank Bennett, who also spent several months in the Abbey. In February 1922, Crowley returned to Paris for a retreat in an unsuccessful attempt to kick his heroin addiction. Subsequently, a young Thelemite named Raoul Loveday moved into the Abbey with his wife Betty May. While Loveday was devoted to Crowley, May detested him and life at the commune. She later said that Loveday was made to drink the blood of a sacrificed cat, and that they were required to cut themselves with razors every time they used the pronoun I. Loveday drank from a local polluted stream, soon developed a liver infection resulting in his death in February 1923. Returning to London, May told her story to the press. John Bull proclaimed Crowley the wickedest man in the world and a man we'd like to hang. And although Crowley deemed many of their accusations against him to be slanderous, he was unable to afford the legal fees to sue them. As a result, John Bull continued its attack, with its stories being repeated in newspapers throughout Europe and in North America. The fascist government of Benito Mussolini learned of Crowley's activities, and in April 1923, he was given a deportation notice, forcing him to leave Italy. Without him, the Abbey closed. So, he moved to Tunisia, Paris, and London, and then Berlin in 1930. And then Crowley lambasted Hitler as a black magician. Crowley was intrigued by the rise of Nazism in Germany, and influenced by his friend Martha Kunzel, believed that Adolf Hitler might convert to Thelema when the Nazis abolished the German OTO and imprisoned Gerner, who had fled to the U.S. Crowley then lambasted Hitler as a black magician. When the Second World War broke out, Crowley wrote to the Naval Intelligence Division offering his services, but they declined. He associated with a variety of figures in British intelligence, including Dennis Wheatley, Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl, wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Ian Fleming, James Bond, and Maxwell Knight, and wrote that he originated the V for Victory sign first used by the BBC. This has never been proven. On the 1st of December 1947, Crowley died at Netherwood of chronic bronchitis aggravated by pleurisy and myocardial degeneration, aged 72. His funeral was held at Brighton Crematorium on the 5th of December. About a dozen people attended, and Louis Wilkinson read excerpts from the Gnostic Mass, the Book of the Law, and Hymn to Pan. The funeral generated press controversy and was labeled a Black Mass by the tabloids. Crowley's body was cremated. His ashes were sent to Carl Germer in the U.S., who buried them in his garden in Hampton, New Jersey. Crowley believed in the objective existence of magic, who he chose to spell as M-A-G-I-C-K, which is an archaic spelling of the word. He provided various different definitions of this term over his career. In his book Magic in Theory and Practice, Crowley defined magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. He also told his disciple Carl Germer that magic is getting into communication with individuals who exist on a higher plane than ours. Mysticism is the raising of oneself to their level. just scamming on here. Opinions on race and gender, possible links to British intelligence, legacy, and influence. In 2002, a BBC poll placed Crowley 73rd in a list of the 100 greatest Britons. Yeah, he was a great influence in the 60s. And he features on the cover art of the Beatles album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Club Band. His motto of "Do What They Wilt" was described on the vinyl of Led Zeppelin's album Led Zeppelin 3. Led Zeppelin's co-founder Jimmy Page bought Boleskine in 1971. And this part of the band's film, The Song Remains the Same, was filmed on the grounds. He sold it in 1992. Though David Bowie makes a fleeting reference to Crowley in the lyrics of his song Quicksand, it has been suggested that the lyrics of Bowie's #1 hit single Let's Dance may subsequently paraphrase Crowley's 1923 poem Lyric of Love to Leah. Ozzy Osbourne and his lyricist Bob Daisy wrote a song entitled Mr. Crowley in 1980. A prophetic quote about the coming of the new eon, borrowed from Crowley's work Magic in Theory and Practice, has been featured as the opening introduction to the video game Blood Omen, Legacy of Khan. That's from 1996. And Crowley then began to receive scholarly attention from academics in the late 1990s. And that's about all I have for Aleister Crowley. My voice is giving out on me. It's thirsty work here at Sinister Sundays. How is everyone? How are you tonight? I'm glad you're talking. 8 viewers in the chat, welcome. Batsara says, keep on keeping on, Papa. Yes. Yes, Papa One. You just keep going. You're doing great. David, are you still here? How are you, friend? Let me scroll up. Chrissy's here. No. Mama One, what's for dinner? Mama One says, good news. I got a text. Baby foal is going to be okay. He made it 12 hours. That's good news. New life. A baby horse is even bigger than this one. She'd probably be afraid of a baby horse, a baby foal. But you probably wouldn't be allowed to play with it because it's too young. 2 newborns. Sadie's good. She's hot. She was a very hot dog today. David says, yes, sir. David, what's for dinner? Birria queso tacos. And Mama One says, Super Antonio, the horse was pregnant with twins. Mama Horse and the other foal sadly passed. Oh, that's bad news. I'm sorry to hear that. That poor foal. But I'm sure you'll find another horse to adopt her. I had teriyaki beef with veggies and rice. Cloudy says, this was my first time hearing about this guy. What a spooky guy he was, LOL. Yeah. But I think, he was a little bit culty. I mean, he had a philosophy, but his philosophy just seemed to involve having sex with as many human beings that would fall under his spell. Cloudy says, Super Antonio, will you ever do a stream about the Travis Walton story? Who's Travis Walton? Travis Walton. I'm looking him up now, Cloudy. Ooh, interesting. Alleged alien abduction of American forestry worker Travis Walton is widely regarded as a hoax, even by believers of UFOs and alien abductions. Did they make a movie out of it? Primetime special in 1970. Oh, Fire in the Sky. I've seen that. I don't remember anything about it, but I remember that title. Yeah, we can do that. Hey, stay here. Come back. We're going to say goodbye. Hup, hup. Come back. Mom once says we had a wonderful homemade fried chicken with many, many different vegetables. It was a slow day due to delivering the babies. Hup, hup. Batzaro says, Cloudy, if you're a reader, he's a very interesting person. Batzaro, you, my friend, are a very interesting person. Mama once says, Papa One fries the best fried chicken he cooked since I was busy. LOL. And that, my friends, yeah, Travis Walton, this seems interesting. I'm going to leave it up, and I'll take a look at it. I've heard about them, Barney and Betty. They were an interracial couple in the 60s who were abducted. Yeah. Maybe we'll do some abductions next. I like that idea. And it's very Sinister Sunday. It would work perfectly. That's about all I have for tonight. Shout out to the mods. Appreciate all of you being here. David, Chrissy, Mama One, Papa One, and new mod Miko Herptile. Batzaro, appreciate you, friend. Thanks for being here. Cloudy. Who else was here? Let's go back. Let me scroll a bit. I'm glad the chat was active. At any rate, I appreciate you being here. We shall return on Marston Mondays. I love that idea about alien abductions. Everyone enjoy the rest of your evening.